it presents an interesting problem for us to try and solve, where we want to get music out there that deserves to be heard. And especially by composers, we typically do not program a lot of female composers, composers of color. We need to be way better at doing that. So I think that type of list, I would be curious. I'd have to look back on it. I wonder how many female composers were listed in that discussion.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer, and this is episode 51. My guest for this episode is David Vickerman. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Now on to the episode. Hi, David.
Hi, Mark. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Happy to be here.
So can you introduce yourself for the listeners?
Sure. My name is David Vickerman. I am the director of bands at San Jose State University.
Yeah. And so how long have you been at San Jose State?
This is, this is my fifth month or something of being there. I just started this past fall.
Excellent. And how are you finding the job so far?
Oh, it's been wonderful. My colleagues are outstanding. The students are excellent. And you can't complain about walking under palm trees to work. I mean, that's definitely not something I'll ever find myself doing. It's been a wonderful experience. Everyone's been extremely welcoming. We actually just had the marching band banquet last week. And even at that banquet, the Kappa Kappa Psi chapter gave flowers to my wife. So she was, surprised, and it was just very touching. We've been absolutely welcomed with open arms here. And
so are you responsible for the full band program or the concert bands? What's the nature of the position?
So the nature of the position right now is that it's just the concert bands. The marching band is actually a separate entity, the Spartan Marching Band. It's directed by Scott Pearson, who's retiring this year. And Scott has been here for the last 40 years, which is amazing and incredible. You just don't see that happening very often anymore. It's been a real treat being here his final year and getting to go through all the different celebrations and everything, the final, games, the final shows, and just seeing what he's meant to the marching band community here at San Jose State. Next year, the entire band program will kind of be combined a little bit under the school. We're actually in the middle of a search right now for a director of athletic bands position. So things will be changing a little bit with regards to just how the paperwork works, but I conduct the wind ensemble and currently the symphonic band, but I just show up and have fun at the football games currently.
So what's your origin story? What's your instrument and how'd you get started playing?
Sure. I actually started piano early on at the age of 5 and took a number of lessons all the way through middle school. I started trumpet in 5th grade. And that's where things, I guess you could say, went south so in terms of being involved in bands, or went north, I guess. But I started trumpet in 5th grade, did it all the way through college. That was my main instrument. I went to college on trumpet. I also sang a lot and acted in musicals all the way through college, which I think has had a huge impact on me as a conductor. When I look back on it, I always, the one thing I wish I would have kept up the piano lessons just because I use it so much now. I sit down at the piano and play more than I do play my trumpet for sure. So I just always wish I would have kept up with that. I graduated from Foothill High School in Pleasanton kind of knowing I wanted to major in music education. My interest in conducting came much later during my undergraduate degree at CSU Stanislaus.
Excellent. And so I don't know if perceptive listeners may have picked up that you're actually home this job.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, we had been living in New Jersey the past 5 years. I was the director of bands at the College of New Jersey. And when this job came open at San Jose State, I decided to, as they say, throw my hat in the ring. But yeah, we're back home here in California. My wife's entire family lives out in the Central Valley. And so we're about an hour and a half drive from them, which is been wonderful for the family life. My sister lives just north of Sacramento. My parents live up in Washington State, but it's still a lot closer for them to get out here than out to New Jersey. And, when it relates to the job, especially, being back in the Bay Area where I grew up, Pleasanton's in the East Bay, just being back in the Bay Area and being able to hopefully give back to the area that helped me grow into the musician I am now is I can't put a price tag on that. It's pretty wonderful. I've been not only welcomed from the school and from the students, but from the music education community in general. I've been to a number of meetings and I've done a number of clinics already since I've been back, and it's just been lovely seeing my friends that I've known from years before when I was teaching here in California and seeing what they're doing with their programs now, and hopefully through what I'm able to do at San Jose State, help them in any way I can.
All right, David. So it's great that you're back home. Can you tell me a little bit more about your experiences in school, in middle school and high school, and what those experiences were like for you?
Sure. I went to middle school at Pleasanton Middle School, obviously in Pleasanton, but we were the very first class. It was a brand new school, and I remember that being a really big deal to us at the time because nothing had been new up until that point. But I remember very clearly our middle school band director, his name was Mark Abel, who's now teaching orchestra and choir at Amador Valley High School in Pleasanton. But at the time, he was the band director at Pleasanton Middle School. And he was the first male teacher any of us had ever had, anyone, through my entire elementary, other than like principals, but no teachers specifically. And I've actually been thinking about this a lot recently, that I know a lot of my friends and I gravitated towards him for one, because of music and the band involvement, but I think also because it was a male role model we just never had in a school. And especially knowing what I know now about and aware of what with the lack of female involvement in conducting and composing, that I can see exactly for me in my own life how that having that role model had a direct impact on what I do, for sure. And not to mention he was a great person and an amazing musician, so and then I went to high school at Foothill High School in Pleasanton. So there's two high schools in Pleasanton. Amador Valley High School, people listening to this podcast might have heard of. They've performed at Midwest and other wonderful places. Fantastic program run by Jonathan Grantham. And I went to Foothill High School. And I think the best part of Foothill was definitely the experiences we got. It was a very well-known marching band program. So we would perform all over the place. We performed for the London New Year's Day Parade. We performed in the Rose Bowl Parade. We performed in Vancouver, you name it. I think that those experiences were really, really wonderful. Unfortunately, I don't really remember a lot of the music we did. I remember some of the field shows we did, but in terms of the concert ensembles, not as much during that time. And that's something that actually did affect me as I got into teaching, because I wanted to make sure that that wasn't the case for my students going forward. So
as you look at your own program and the way you conduct and the way you teach, what do you think you're still carrying from those years in middle school and high school?
Oh, man, that is a good question. I would say that probably two things. That I would love to think that the students in my ensembles know that I care about them as people. And I believe I definitely felt that way in my middle school band program, for sure. That I would like to think that happens. I'm sure there are some students who would disagree, but I try. And that's what I try to show them, that it's beyond just what's going on in class. We have so many students now are stressed out. There's a lot going on in their lives, and sometimes life gets in the way of things. And I want them to know that first and foremost, I'm concerned for their health and safety. That I've had students who've missed dress rehearsal because of being sick, and then been very worried to tell me stuff like this. And I'm always first and foremost going, I'm glad you're okay. That's more important, that you're safe. So I definitely think that's something I got out of those experiences. And in terms of programming, I think I also am really trying to make sure that the literature I choose to program with all my ensembles, that there's something that can leave a mark on them indelibly. There's no way that any program will reach, like every single piece on every program will reach every student. That's on, I want to reach all my students, and all different audience members as well, and so it's, I'm just hoping maybe one piece or something they'll really remember, like, oh, do you remember when we did such and such a piece? Yeah, that was really great. I didn't have that feeling very much through high school, and so because of that, I have tried to make an effort in my teaching ever since then, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things in there. I'll start with the music, the most recent thing you said. Mm-hmm. So when you think about that and you're looking at programming, how do you define what music leaves a mark? How do you define what you're looking for?
I think it's obviously a great question and very tough one to answer, quite honestly. It's I think it's a combination of things. We all kind of gravitate towards various aspects of music differently. I used to teach a class at the College of New Jersey in instrumental literature. And the first class, we would talk about pieces that made an impact on them from high school or middle school. And then more importantly, why? Why did it make an impact? And I think it was the most eye-opening thing for the students and me was to see why those pieces made an impact on them. Perhaps, you could have two students sitting next to each other and one of them say, oh, I loved when we did the transcription of, Elsa's procession to the cathedral. It's so emotional and just those big moments. So I just loved the emotion in it. And a person sitting next to them saying, I loved when we did Persichetti. The harmony was just so unique. I'd never heard harmony like that. And they're both looking at each other like they're crazy for that being the reason they liked the piece, and it's always eye-opening to them as future music educators that not everyone's going to connect to a piece of music like you do. And it's really more about finding quality literature, regardless of your taste. Like what makes a piece quality? I think also that the more direct answer to your question would be a piece that has depth is more likely to, live longer into memory and change how they think about things. And of course, any piece that has some kind of experience associated with it, I think those are obvious. Like if you went on tour, you played at Carnegie Hall, something like that, those pieces might make a much bigger impact, but not necessarily because of the piece itself, but because of the wrapping in which it was put in some ways. So how I choose it is, it's going to be dependent upon each situation. I'm a big proponent of making what we do a little more externally facing, that we should be reaching our audiences where they are, trying to make them think differently and less about the internal, like looking internally at what we do. So finding ways to connect the students to older literature that they may not be as comfortable with, and at the same time connecting with contemporary literature in their own time. It's a multifaceted process, and so many things go into that. Like I said, we would need, I'll come back for a later episode and we'll just talk solely about that, I guess.
Well, yeah. And so how about commissions? Do you do a lot of commissions?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've been involved in a number of consortiums and a number of commissions. I also had the great honor of working with Great Noise Ensemble in Washington, D.C., a contemporary music group there. Artistic director is Armando Bajola, and I've done a number of his pieces. We commissioned and premiered a piece of his last year at the College of New Jersey entitled Last Breaths. Well, it was a transcription of a piece of his, actually. Right now, I'm in the process of commissioning a piece by Tina Talon for Electronics and Winds that is also a commentary on rising sea levels. So it's an environmental piece. And we will be premiering it in March this year. So there will be a commission consortium coming out very soon once we get our ducks in a row at the school and they're able to give me a little bit more information. But yes, I've been involved in as many as possible. It's really important to me and I love kind of being in the process of birthing a new piece into existence, kind of like a conductor midwife, so I enjoy the entire process.
You talked about consortiums, so we're going to come back to consortiums, maybe tied in with this. But
sure.
You're a college band director. You're teaching conducting and fostering students. How do we encourage more female involvement, more involvement from people of color in conducting, in composition, in the band world?
In the band world, in particular, well, I think it's the same for anyone, honestly, but it's about actively doing it. It's about those of us that have been placed in positions of privilege and power actively trying to make changes to the system. So, for instance, I was asked to do the CASMEC reading band session. CASMEC, for those of you that don't know, is the California All-State Music Educators Conference. It's a combination of all of the smaller groups like California band directors, California orchestra directors, all into one conference. Up until a couple years ago, they were all doing their own conferences, and there's been a push recently to try to combine them, which I think is outstanding and wonderful. I was asked, since I'm new, I believe, here, to do the reading band, and I asked them for what had been done in the previous few years. And not super surprisingly, so this isn't a slight against anyone that did them at all. There was only a total of 2 female composers in the past 3 years, I believe, in the reading band sessions. And reading band sessions, to me, are the perfect opportunity to get people aware of music they may not naturally go to. And I'm just as guilty of this as the next person. I when I'm thinking about programming groups, of course, I'm likely to think of pieces I'm aware of and have heard because they've been programmed. It's kind of like a snake eating its own tail problem that we have to be active in getting some of this literature out there. So for my at the time of the publication of this podcast, the reading band will already be done. So I'm sure it went really, really well. And the reading band list was all female composers of band literature in order to just give people an idea of pieces that they might want to program. I'm not even going to say that all the pieces are better than other ones, but they should be aware that these are out there. And I also tried to concentrate on composers they may not have heard of. There's some that people know very well, but there's a lot out there. And so I'm doing what I can. I don't, it doesn't deserve any accolades or anything like that because it's really trying to right a wrong, in my opinion. And like I said, I'm just as guilty as the next person of many, many years of not considering that in my programming, not considering that, when I'm teaching students. So I think that's one way, just being active, doing things when you have the ability to make a change, to make a statement about it. And I am like you said, I'm director of bands at a university. I'm a tenured professor. I have a lot of safety, and I want to use that to help those that may not. And so I'm doing what I can. And I think, providing those role models for students, hopefully my students, for instance, in seeing me do that, might be like, you know what, maybe I can be a composer. Maybe that's something I want to do. Maybe that I can look at that as an ideal. And the same would be for conducting as well, that we encourage our female students who are interested in doing it and be active in trying to help them further their careers and further their education in conducting. It's the same thing, but it really does take those of us that have the ability being active. I think that's to me, that's what I see as the big difference.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's obviously an issue that shouldn't be as controversial as it is.
No, and it's becoming, honestly, this is a good thing. I think back to even 10 years ago, it wasn't even things people were talking about. It just wasn't even in a discussion, at least not ones that was reaching my ears. Mm-hmm. And now it's so much more because of what's going on in our culture, which is great. It's the something that's needed to happen for years. And so it's becoming less controversial, which is good because that means change is going to be easier to come about. I hope, whether it turns out to be long-term or, that's always, we never know. But I think it takes, like I said, those of us in positions such as mine, really being active to try and make things better for those of us around us.
Mm-hmm. And so the next question has to happen because it's the obvious follow-up, at least from the way I'm looking at it as a composer. What place do the traditional warhorse pieces in the band repertoire, where do they fit into this discussion? I mean,
well, yeah, because everyone goes, right. If you're giving something, if you're giving preference somewhere, it's coming from somewhere else, right? So something's going to have to give. And yes, that is true. In terms of where those pieces lie, I still think it's important for our students to have those experiences with some of those pieces. It just means less of them. And I'm not convinced that that's a bad thing at all. I think it's a very healthy thing. So I heard a really great presentation with Jacob Wallace, Courtney Snyder, Chester Phillips, and Jennifer Jolly last year at CBDNA in Kansas City, talking about the issue of programming female composers. And I was already trying to actively do things to help that, but I'd seen how bad the reality was really spurred me to make it a big deal, as I know it did with many of my colleagues. So I think that, hearing presentations like that, it's more in the water now. It's definitely something that people should be aware of and should be working towards, fixing. And there's lots of ways you can do it. For instance, they mentioned you can, there is the kind of idea of programming an entire concert of female composers, but I don't know if that's actually something I'm interested in doing, if only because it highlights its separateness in a way. And I want it to just be, I want to look back in like 2 to 3 years and have this not be a thing, or look back and go, wow, look how silly we were, before that was silly that was a thing. I want my daughters, of which I have 2, to grow up and not realize this was a thing at one point in time. Right. So so to me, it's about trying to find a way, whatever works in your situation. It's tough. Those of us that teach, educational ensembles, you're dealing with a lot of interesting situations, like, oh, I might really like to do this piece by this female composer, but it's a little too tough for my group, and I can't find one that fits in that 3 minutes that you know what I mean? There's a million things to consider, and it gets tough, but it doesn't mean we should stop trying, I guess. Keep trying to make it better.
Yeah, I asked that question because, I've said this on the podcast in previous episodes, a rising tide lifts all boats. I am not threatened as a male composer or as a white composer by other composers. I welcome more music into this world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see that it still is an issue when you have 4 major American orchestras programming entire seasons without any female composers this year. I mean, that it's shocking in so many ways.
The difference between the LA Philharmonic and the other orchestras that you mentioned is stark, isn't it?
It's unreal. It's just, it's weird crazy to me that, especially at those levels where you have no excuses to do anything you want, basically, in terms of like literature you could choose to do. It's not like Philadelphia is going, oh, I don't know if my trumpets can handle this. They don't have to deal with those problems. I know it's a money thing, though. It's a different, like, they have business interests that they have to keep track of.
I hear that a lot, but I think more than anything, I just don't think the people who are on those boards and making those decisions even see it as a problem. So what's wrong with doing Beethoven 7 for the 10th time in the last 20 years? To them, that's what's right.
Right. Well, they're also, I mean, and it is different from us in the sense that, there's no business there necessarily where I'm trying to make a bottom line. I'm trying to educate my students, educate my audience, educate my community through our programming. But it is interesting that, all you have to do is look at the LA Phil and go, well, it's clearly not a money problem for them. So I don't think that argument is stale already.
Yeah, let's see how they do. Yeah,
exactly. And that's why, and also, quite honestly, and I've seen a lot of talk on Twitter about this, which I think is great, we need to be better supporters when we see organizations, and not just your local giant orchestras, but local chamber groups, local chamber orchestras, when they are programming the way you think it should be done. Go out and support them then. Go to a concert if you can. Help them in some way, shape, or form, because that's what we want to see happen. Right. It's the same in, local government. You like what someone's all about, go help them out in your local elections, not necessarily the national ones. We're gonna make the change locally first, and then it will flood up top as usual.
Yeah. No, I agree with that 100%. And so speaking of making changes locally, you brought up consortiums earlier. Mm-hmm. And so what does it look like to put together a consortium, and what are you looking to get out of that from your program?
Well, usually, at least for me, the few that I've led, it has come out of a desire to get a certain piece or a certain composer or a certain voice, into the medium. So all of the drive comes out of that desire to see that we get something from this composer into the band world. I'm often looking for, as we kind of already mentioned, composers that may not have been tapped before or have a unique voice. In terms of the consortium, it's I've been a part of more than I've led. And so that's easier. That's, here, I'll send my invoice. Here's the check. Put my name on the score. Great. Thank you very much. Leading it has, I've I'll be perfectly honest, I've run into all sorts of problems doing it because every school is different. We have different, who collects the money, what are the rules behind doing it. There's been a number of things I've run into with that, and oftentimes learned a lot through a bunch of mistakes I've made, as I'm sure we all have, in doing that. But it hasn't ever stopped me from wanting to be involved in that process. Like I said, I really believe in doing that and having our students be a part of that, because I think it's important for what we do, period. And I want to be involved in bringing new sounds, new ideas into the wind band medium in particular.
So, David, before I get into my big questions here, can you tell me a little bit more about the program at San Jose State and maybe what it would look like to a prospective student or someone who might want to go study there?
Sure. I am relatively new, as I've said earlier, so I apologize if I make any mistakes in any of this information, but I'm still trying to get, as I say, like eagle eye view on everything. It's tough when you're in the weeds all the time, but I think the program at San Jose State is truly unique in the sense that we are in the middle of Silicon Valley, right in the heart of everything progressing our country forward in so many ways, not only commercially but socially, everything, and that's at the heart of what not just the School of Music and Dance believes, but what the heart of the university believes. I try to program concerts with our both wind ensemble and symphonic band that are looking outward into society, looking outward into our communities, and trying to connect with people and get them to think maybe a little differently about either what we do or about issues surrounding us. In terms of the band program in particular, we have 2 concert bands, which I'm hoping in the next few years to grow to 3. We have 2 concert bands, wind ensemble and symphonic band, all of which are available for non-music majors as well. So students that are interested in being involved in the concert bands can audition for wind ensemble and be a part of it, along with any of the other concert ensembles as well. Of course, they can also be involved in our marching band and our pet bands, which play at the basketball games and football games. There's a lot to be involved in our program. We have a fantastic choral department, fantastic string department. Overall, a lot of really wonderful faculty, award-winning faculty from all over the place that you can be involved in as well. Music theater, you name it. We also have graduate programs in music, including conducting, and there are scholarships and TA. There is TA money available for working as a graduate student as well. So lots of opportunity. It's a great place to come and be a part of the middle, the middle of what Silicon Valley is doing and being involved in, bringing music to audiences in new ways, basically.
Where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
And this is a tough one for me since I see the benefits and also, of course, the drawbacks of competition. I can tell you that what I can't stand is when I have to give a number to a performance. That's the part I don't like. When I've had to adjudicate and I'm trying to put a number to what I just heard, that's where it always feels, disingenuous. Was that an 82 or an 83? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I'm doing it in comparison to other groups I've heard. Was their intonation a 4 or a 5? I think that's honestly where I struggle. I always prefer to be involved in festivals where there's clinics because I feel like that's where I can be the most helpful often. I can go in and, get 15, 20 minutes and say, look, this is the types of things I heard, really enjoyed this. If we try these things out, maybe we'll improve a tiny bit. The other reality is that there is competition in music, right? I mean, we have competition for jobs, for instance. It's just a reality in what we do. To me, the problem is when it becomes the focus. I read the autobiography of Bill Walsh, who is the famous coach of the 49ers, San Francisco 49ers. And the title of the book is called The Score Will Take Care of Itself. And any of my conducting students will recognize me talking about this because I quote a lot of it in our courses. One of the major themes throughout the book is that focusing on what you're doing at that moment will beget the results you want. In other words, not worrying about the score, not worrying about winning, but actually focusing on little things like how to tackle better, how to block better. And then all of a sudden what happens is then you start winning. It's that they change the focus in the organization from, oh, we aren't winning to we are going to play football better. And when we do that better, all of a sudden we would start winning. So the connection I usually try to make to ensembles is that if we focus on the how, and most importantly, why of what we're doing during rehearsals, it will then beget those fantastic performances that we're going for. Like instead of worrying about the number, the competition, whether we got unanimous superiors, like really focus on how does this phrase go? Why do we play this phrase this way? Why does this fifth have to be in tune? Like talking about those things in rehearsal then begets those results.
I have a sign on my piano that I picked up from another podcast, Garrett Hope's Portfolio Composer podcast, that he had an author on, I think it was John David Mann. And he wrote something about authors. He's an author, and he said, you just write a good sentence. And so on my piano, I have a saying that says, you can't try to write a great piece of music, but you can try to write a great phrase.
Exactly.
And so I sit down. Every time I sit down, I look at that on my piano because I want to just write in the moment the best music I can in that phrase, and then don't worry about writing a great piece because you can't try to write a masterpiece. You just get locked when that happens. And
I think if I can add to that, I think part of the other problem we have now is with the advent and ubiquitousness of social media, our ability now to like compare ourselves to what other people are doing is through the roof. Like we've never had as much access to what everyone else is doing as we do now. And I think it's easy to look at that and be like, oh, I wish I was being recognized for X, or I wish my band was playing at this place, and then you start worrying about those things instead of, what, like you said, how about we play this phrase well?
Yep.
How about we, and if you focus on that, that's what gets those things eventually,
I had I hate to make it about me at the moment.
That's
Sorry,
right.
David.
No, that's fine.
But I just had that feeling this morning. I almost posted on Twitter, like my mindset is all off because I saw someone's success. Yep. And rather than I'm happy for them, but I still got that twinge. And when I'm actually doing well, that twinge never happens because I'm not worried about anybody but what's in front of me.
Yep.
Anyway,
and I think we've all felt that. No, we've all felt that at some point in time. And I think anyone that says they haven't is lying. I think that everyone, and that is part of I would think most people involved in what we do have drive to do better, or else we probably wouldn't be involved in it, so I think you see that, and it is good. It's interesting because it provides some kind of like, I would really like that. But it's about what you do. It's the medium is the message thing, the old Marshall McLuhan article where it's like, it's the way you talk about it. If you go in, if you get inspired because someone else did something and you go into your band the next day and be like, you know what, I want to, perform at X like this person's doing. And, that's the point, then it's not going to work well. It's where you come in the next day and go, you know what, we're going to play that fifth in tune today. We're going to you turn it into the thing instead of the result, So,
yeah. No, it's great advice. And it's part of having a good mindset about being a creative. It's part of the recipe for fighting off the imposter syndrome that crops up. And all those things.
Oh yeah. We all deal with it. Yep.
Oh yeah. I get it. I get it on this podcast sometimes.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm sorry. I hijacked your answer there.
No, it's fine. No, please. It's great.
All right. So let's move on. What hard-earned lessons about being a conductor and teacher would you like to share with others?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I could say. I think really important to me, it's something I've definitely think more and more about. I think the other thing that happens when you do what I do, when I first started teaching college, I would say things I knew to be true. And then it was probably like a few weeks later that I realized, do I really know that? Like I'm realizing the responsibility of, I have students now taking notes on things that come out of my mouth. And I'll never forget, I worked with an honor band my first year there in New Jersey, and I was talking to the students in rehearsal, and thought I was doing a good job. And, I thought that everything was going well. And I said something, I honestly don't remember what it was now, but I looked up and I saw probably about 12 to 13 band directors all like look down and start writing down what I just said. And in that split second of a moment, I all of a sudden went, wait, what did I just say? I don't know if I want them to write that down. That might not be like, forget I said that, So it has really made me be self-conscious, and not in a bad way, but really knowing, think about how I have gotten to where I am, with the lessons I've learned as a conductor. So one of the big ones for me is that the why of what we do, I think, is critical to creating genuine artistic and aesthetic experiences for our students. The why. I think we're really, really good in general, especially in bands, about how and what, do this, this is out of tune, point out these things that, need more balance here. But I think honestly, as a field, we're not very good at the why. I've seen a number of rehearsals where that's all they are. And it's not that it's bad. We get the job done, but I feel like the long-term investment isn't there unless there's a why. Why do I phrase it this way? Why do I need to balance this way? Is it because this motive isn't heard unless we balance that way? We really need to understand pieces intimately. How many times I'm sure anyone listening to this that's a conductor, how many times we've wanted our ensembles to know the piece the way we know it, and if we never give them the opportunity to do that, it's hard. So I'm a huge proponent of comprehensive musicianship through performance methodology. I was already teaching like that when I was teaching in high school in California. But then when I discovered the name for it, I had no idea. It helped me kind of codify my beliefs about why it works. For those that listening that don't know about comprehensive musicianship through performance, I highly recommend you look it up. What I take, the biggest thing I take out of it is that when you're establishing objectives in a rehearsal or in a classroom with music, they should be more than just technical objectives. We're really good at that. Our students will be able to play correctly the rhythms from measures 1 to 10. But it should be more than that. Students should be able to explain the form of this piece, or aesthetic objectives, which they talk about, which I think are brilliant and we never do well enough. It'll be the student can explain how they feel when they get to the climax at measure 53, that those types of things we are not as good at doing. And when I've been able to do that in rehearsals, I think it's gone very, very well in terms of the students really understanding how the piece works. And guess what? They probably come back to it and don't make the mistakes again because they know why it's supposed to be there. It's just not good enough anymore, in my opinion, to say that rhythm is wrong, do this, that this is incorrect, do this. Instead, we need to ask questions of our students. We need to, ask them, have we seen that rhythm before? If it repeats here, do you think the composer is trying to say something about its importance? And what do you think that importance is? Have you, that type of thing, really getting them to think. I think we often don't assume our students are as musically mature as they are. So it's really important that oh, hi, I just had someone interrupt. Sorry.
It's okay. It's a great segue to have your daughter come in the middle of the interview, because I'm just about to ask you, how do you find work-life balance?
Yeah, that was actually one of the funnier things about, I was going to say actually in the previous one, some of the hard lessons that being learned about a conductor is about work-life balance. So it works well. I remember making a very public post on Facebook a few years back, telling anyone that was a Facebook friend, obviously, that I was really struggling with work-life balance, and I was looking for input and help from colleagues and friends. And it was actually really helpful to see so many of my colleagues chime in and say that they had the same issues. So for one, I didn't feel like I was the only one really struggling with this. But I remember one colleague messaged me and said he had discovered that there's actually no such thing as balance, but basically life is out of balance all the time, and you have to recognize it and try to force the pendulum back the other way when you can. And that's something I actively try to do right now. I've been definitely in the thick of it with work. And so when I get an opportunity to be at home and be dad and be husband, I really try to take advantage of those. It's hard though. It's a constant struggle. It is. And it's hard to remember sometimes we have to be healthy and happy in order to be the best for our students. It's that old, kind of like comparison when you do if you fly a plane and they say the oxygen mask drop down, that you'll notice they say you must put yours on before you assist a child next to you. And the reason why is that if you pass out, you can't help your kids. If you're not healthy, you're not going to be able to help your students. So, though it feels awful sometimes to not get right back to my students in an email, I realize that I have to prioritize my time at home. Not all the time, but in certain times I definitely need to prioritize time at home.
So what are the challenges facing music education, and how can we best meet them?
Oh, man, this is like a whole other podcast too. Well, I think there's a number of them. I think we kind of hinted at this earlier. I think one of the biggest problems is access to quality music education, especially bands. As we all know, anyone listening to this, I'm sure, knows it's expensive to run a comprehensive music program. And with declining government funding of schools at every level, music programs have become extremely, if not wholly, dependent upon community financial support. This has then made it easier for programs in affluent communities to have great band programs, and then almost impossible for those in economically disadvantaged communities. So this creates an automatic barrier to access. Music, and especially band programs, only become accessible to those with the financial stability to have them. And this has been happening for decades, but now it's just becoming very, very obvious. This obviously in turns mean only certain communities are being exposed to bands and band music, which is then thinning out the interest for those continuing their studies. If we are only able to access band programs in affluent communities, what is the makeup of those affluent communities? It's different everywhere. Like the cultural makeup of affluent communities here in the South Bay is very different than it might be, somewhere in the Midwest or on the East Coast. But it still thins out the abilities for cultural diversity in band directors and music education. And quite honestly, this is one of the reasons I'm really happy to be here at San Jose State University. It has one of the most diverse student populations in the nation, and our students come from almost every type of background, and many of them are the first in their family to go to college. So it's really nice to be a part of that and to hopefully help maybe, when I look back on my career, think that I made a little tiny impact with that some of these students are able to help get access to bands and music education easier, and then a number of them we kind of already talked about a little bit. Female representation, I think, is a major issue and something I'm working on trying to rectify in a small way. I'm not going to do it myself, obviously, but I think if we all just do a little bit, it'll get better a lot. And then the other kind of two things I think about, quality of music. I think this is something that's been a more recent interest of mine, that I don't think we talk objectively about the quality of our music enough. I think we chalk everything up to taste, which is part of it. But as conductors, we should be able to discuss objectively the quality of a composition and be able to program based on that, and be able to explain, more importantly, in a lot of ways, to our students who are going to go out and then program for their ensembles about quality of the actual music. And then, I'm sorry, I'm hitting a lot of these. These are all like pet projects and important aspects of my scholarly and creative work. But I think it's really important that we start thinking about what we do as externally facing. There was a fantastic keynote address at the recent New Music Gathering conference by Stephen Schick, who teaches down at, I believe, UC San Diego. He's a fantastic percussionist and conductor. And he, I believe, coined the term externally facing artistic practice, and this idea of what do we do that then affects culture? What do we do that is showing that we are a part of what's going on right now? Is it good enough to just do a concert of Holst and Granger, who I love, and love performing and doing that music? Is it good enough to just do that concert anymore? And every time I ask myself that question, I say, I don't know. I do concerts like that. Not every concert I have is going to be externally facing, but I'm really trying to find a way to be connected to what's going on in our society, in our culture, because I think that's going to have people connect to what we do in bands and in large ensembles. It's also going to connect our students more, perhaps, to their lived experiences. I'm actually going to be presenting at CBDNA Northwestern Conference at Sonoma State on this with my colleague from the College of New Jersey, Dr. Colleen Sears. We're doing a presentation towards an externally facing artistic practice in large ensembles. So I think it's something that's really, really important. Hard to kind of none of these things I'm talking about are an easy switch. This is like decades of work of doing this stuff, and maybe things will start to turn for the better. But we've got a lot of work to do. As we kind of said earlier, there's a lot to do, and honestly, I'm happy to try and do my little bit towards that. If I can just nudge things in that direction, I will be very happy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
I think I was much more aware at the time, or I was much more, I don't want to say obsessed because that's not what it was, but I was contemplating a lot more what people thought about me, and that how important that was, and that I need to have, reputation, that type of thing. So I would go back and tell myself, just you are already the best you can be. Like no one else can do you the way you do you, which sounds strange when I say it out loud. But don't try to follow in the footsteps of those giants because you aren't them. It doesn't matter. And it's not interesting to be someone else. Listen to your true inner self and just be content in that. And people will eventually understand and might actually be interested in what you're doing, which I've started to see a little bit, quite honestly, which is lovely. I've always had a lot of these very strong opinions about what we should be doing in music education and in bands. And I see now people starting to kind of understand what I'm talking about. And that's great. I'm happy to be a part of that. And if I could just go back and tell that 20-year-old, like, be cool. It's all right. Like what you believe in and what you think is really important, it has value. You don't have to worry about what other people are doing so much. That's like I said, you are the best you can be.
All right, so we've done some talk on quality and programming, but this next question is not about your favorite work. It's about what work would you do last if you could control that decision?
It's so tough. It's honestly, I saw this question when you sent it to me, and I've had it for weeks, and I'm still struggling with exactly what I would want to put up there. I don't know. I think that my tastes in music are so varied. I think what I'd love, quite honestly, if I'm being 100% honest here, I think what I would love to do for my last, if it was the last thing I was ever going to conduct, would be some kind of world premiere. It's not a piece that I've done yet. I would love to think that the very last thing I did has life beyond what I did. I think we all are looking for that immortality in some way, and not that I'm special to be immortal, but that something I did helped to make something become perhaps more than mortal. I don't know if that makes sense. So I could say lots of pieces I love and, it'd be really great, do the first whole suite. That'd be lovely. Or, tried out all the old war horses, Lincolnshire Posy, which I love doing. But honestly, if it fits my personality and the way I do things, I think that would be, some amazing world premiere, maybe, something that uses electronics, something that has a statement about the world and the culture we live in at the time. And maybe have it end, so any composers out there listening, if you want to write this, I'll just tell you, like, it should end, and just kind of disappear off into the ether, that the music keeps going, Yeah, I know that's probably like the worst answer ever in this podcast to that, but that's probably what it would be for me.
Well, I've had a lot of answers. A lot of people try to dodge that question, but I have not had anyone dodge it in such an eloquent way.
Yeah, it's an absolute dodge. I know it is, but I mean, I'm being honest. Like, I'm thinking, if I was like to do a retirement concert right now, and I have a long way to go before that, hopefully. But if I was to do it right now, that's truly what I think that's what I'd want. I really do think that that's the last thing that with the last thing I did on the podium, that I brought something to life. That's super special to me, super important. So, composers, hit me up with your ideas. I'm happy to take a look and hold them off for 40 years or so.
Well, it's a great answer, but I made Jerry Junkin answer this question, David. So come on now.
Oh man. All right. Let's see here. Okay. Then if it said like arm twisting, honestly, I'd probably say, like, are we allowed to do chamber stuff? Are we allowed to say chamber?
Sure.
Okay. I'd probably say the Mozart C minor serenade.
Okay.
For sure. That is, if those of you listening, if you have not listened to the C minor serenade, you are absolutely doing yourself a disservice. You have to go and then get the score out and look at how ridiculous that piece is well written. It's incredible.
I'm going to make an editorial note at the moment. No, seriously, that it's interesting to me that this is a band podcast and I'm interviewing people who are heavily invested in band. But the answer to this question, 9 times out of 10, since I've asked it this way, has been a piece from the orchestral or chamber repertoire.
Yep. Well, it's, there is, honestly, I could easily throw Ecstatic Waters in there too. We're doing it right now. And the end of that piece, if that was the last thing I ever did, I think I'd be okay with that. There's many. This is the thing is, like, there's so many, but that piece, the Mozart, it's just stunning. It's just,
I get
it's hard. It's hard. It's hard. I mean, you got this piece. I mean, it's hard. It's hard when I have people in discussions sometimes, like, is that an A piece or a B piece? We don't have a lot of A band pieces, you know what I mean? That are, it's an A for sure.
Yeah. So this is going to be released on March 12th. Mm-hmm. Is there anything coming up that you would like to share or promote?
Yeah, absolutely. We have our upcoming concert with the San Jose State University Wind Ensemble on Tuesday, March 20th at 7:30 p.m. at the Hammer Theater in downtown San Jose. We are going to be, the entire program deals with pieces about water and poetry. So we are doing, and the earth, basically. We're doing Symphonies of Gaia by Jace Ogren. We're doing my arrangement from Sigur Ros's one of their albums called Arabatur, which is Icelandic for rowboat. We're doing a brand new world premiere by Tina Talon entitled Anthropogenic Tides, which is fantastic. And I hope a lot of people come out to hear it, because I really think this piece is going to deserve a lot of performances. And then we're going to close out the concert with Stephen Bryant's Ecstatic Waters. So 2 different pieces with live electronics. The entire auditorium is going to be bathed in active lighting. There's going to be all sorts of interesting stuff at the concert. So it's definitely something, at least those in this area don't want to miss for sure. They'll definitely have to make their way to the Hammer Theater that night at 7:30 p.m. I should mention too that we are actually doing that concert in conjunction with a project between high schools in California and New Jersey, actually high schools and middle schools in California and New Jersey. Julie Bounds at Santa Teresa High School, Nicole Del Nero at Toms River High School in New Jersey, Andrea Fenner at Bernal Intermediate School in California, and John Hilcom at Reddington Middle School in New Jersey. And we're all going to be performing Earth Song by Frank DeKelly. They won't be performing it at the concert, but our wind ensemble will perform it there. And that they are doing, they are working on the piece and across the country sending questions to each group about what they think it means with regards to environmentalism, society, that type of stuff. So it's a fun project. It would take like way too long to explain the entire thing right now, but it's a wonderful kind of capstone, hopefully, for them in that project coming to that concert as well.
That sounds awesome. Mm-hmm. So how can people get in touch with you?
Sure. Probably the easiest way is if you want to email me. It's david.vickerman@sjsu.edu. Though, of course, I think I just mentioned that my email inbox is ridiculously full all the time. You could also find me on Facebook and on Twitter and Instagram, and that I think it's @dvickerman for all of those. Maybe not Facebook, but you can find me on Facebook and look me up. That's probably the easiest way. I have a website too, but I don't even want to give it out. I'm sure people can find it, but I haven't updated it in so long. So I need to go through and definitely update that. But those are probably the easiest ways for people to get in touch with me.
Sure. Thanks, David. I really appreciate your time. This was a great interview.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate it. I had a great time talking with you.